Lactate threshold training for endurance runners. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about improving your lactate threshold pace in order to improve your race performance and increase your training speeds. Now, there's all sorts of different thresholds out there, but generally speaking, when someone is referencing your threshold, what they're usually talking about is the second lactate threshold. This is the point at which blood lactate levels start to increase exponentially. So if you imagine you're running along at a very easy pace, you can talk comfortably. When you're doing that, the amount of lactate in your blood, if you were to measure it, is rising, but very, very slowly. If you increase your pace to a sort of effort where you can just about talk, but you're struggling a little bit, then the lactate in your blood will be increasing quite quickly. If you increase your pace even more to the point where you really can't talk anymore, and you were to measure the concentration of lactate in the blood, you would notice that it is rising very, very quickly. In fact, it's rising exponentially. And when they do this in a lab doing a lactate threshold test, they will measure the concentration of lactate in the blood, and they'll see that there's a certain point as you increase your speed of running where the lactate level increases very dramatically compared to the rest of the time. If they plot it on a graph, it will spike up very quickly at a certain point, a certain threshold, and we call that the lactate threshold because it's the threshold beyond which blood lactate levels will increase very, very quickly. This is a useful point for training because it gives us a reference point that we can all agree on. That's someone's lactate threshold. And then we can prescribe training zones as percentages of that lactate threshold. So we have like custom training zones for pace and heart rate, all based around this point at which the lactate increases exponentially. Now that point, the lactate threshold, is very close to your 1 hour pace. So if you were to run a time trial, so 60 minutes, go as fast as you can, whatever your average pace is, that's pretty much your lactate threshold pace. Whatever your average heart rate is during that hour, that's pretty much your lactate threshold heart rate. And this means for a lot of recreational runners who will do a 10K in either just under or just over an hour or thereabouts, their lactate threshold pace and heart rate is very similar to their 10K threshold pace and heart rate. But why do we want to improve our lactate threshold pace? So if you get fitter, if you do workouts like threshold intervals that we're going to talk about today, you'll improve the pace at which you can run for 1 hour. So if they were to test you in a lab and look for that point when your lactate rises exponentially in the blood, they would notice that after like 4, 8, or 12 weeks of training your threshold pace, the speed that you're running, when that happens in your blood, is faster. So essentially your threshold pace is increased. And that also means that your race performance, generally speaking, will also have improved. So when you improve your lactate threshold pace, you almost always improve your race pace. So everything from the 1 mile, 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon, all of those events usually will be pretty closely correlated with someone's lactate threshold pace. Now, it's not a one-to-one. So just because you improve your 1 hour time trial or your lactate threshold pace does not mean that you'll definitely improve in those other events. But there is a strong correlation there. So if you improve your threshold pace, there is a good chance you're going to improve your race pace at those distances too. And the other benefit that is more practical, but is certainly helpful for people's mindset, is a lot of people, when they figure out their custom training zones for heart rate and pace, and then they have to do their zone 2 runs, right? The endurance runs, the base building runs, sometimes they're called like steady runs or easy runs. When they've customized their training zones, be it by pace or heart rate, and then their coach or their app or their sports scientist, whoever is helping the person with their training, assigns them their training pace for their long run and their endurance runs and their easy runs, they always hate it. They always say it's too slow. It feels like I'm not doing anything. When can I run my long runs faster? And when my runners complain about this, which they always do, I always tell them you have to improve your threshold pace. If you improve your threshold pace, your zones will be recalibrated off that threshold and your zone 2 pace will go up. So if your threshold pace, last time we tested it, was 9 minutes 30 per mile, and then you spend 8 weeks working on improving your threshold pace and it improves to 9 minutes per mile, then your zone 2 pace will also increase roughly by 30 seconds per mile. So if you want to do your easy runs faster, improve your lactate threshold pace. If you want to improve your lactate threshold pace, we're going to go through how you can do that. So generally speaking, with any type of workout that's designed to improve your threshold pace, you want to be spending some time in and around threshold, either just underneath it, just above it, or exactly on it. And then we want to be spending a decent amount of time there, like a moderate amount of time there. Thinking like for someone who's in good shape, you want to be in and around threshold for more than 15 minutes for the training session. Ideally, more than that, but at least 15 minutes to get an improvement in your threshold pace after 4 to 8 weeks of working on this. And then the work to rest ratio, they can vary wildly depending on like who's programming the training, but very commonly you'll see something like 4 to 1, so like 4 minutes on, 1 minute off, or 8 minutes on, 2 minutes off, that kind of thing. But you can have longer work to rest ratios, so you might have longer rest periods where you have 2 to 1, so 2 on, 1 off. You might go as much as like 5 on, 1 off. That'd be like 10 minutes on, 2 minutes off, right? So you can have a wide variety of different work to rest ratios, just depending on like the timing of the training session in your season, as well as the experience and the fitness of the athlete. You can appreciate that a 10 to 2 interval is going to be harder than a 2 to 1, right? So if you have a less fit athlete who is just getting used to threshold training, you're probably going to start them with more rest intervals and have something more like 2 to 1. So maybe 4 minutes on, 2 minutes off. When you have a fitter athlete, you might do like 10 minutes on, 2 minutes off. But it really depends on the way the session has been designed, and there's various ways of putting it together. So I've brought up on the screen here one of our training sessions. So we've got a 5-minute warm-up at zone 1 or 2, and then we've got 6 intervals where we've got 4 minutes on, where we're going to be running above threshold pace. So anything from 100 to 115% of threshold pace, right? So we're going to be going faster than our 1 hour pace. We're going to be holding that for 4 minutes, followed by a 1 minute rest. And we've got 6 of those, right? So the first interval is going to be quite easy, right? To hold that, just above 1 hour pace for 4 minutes isn't that hard. The second interval isn't that hard, but by the third interval, when you've only had a 1 minute rest between each one, it's getting harder. By the fourth interval, it's getting really hard. By the fifth interval, it's getting really quite challenging to hold that pace. So these are the kind of slow burn, death by 1,000 cuts workouts where as you are going through them, each interval is getting progressively harder and harder, whereas at first they don't seem very challenging, and by the end they feel very, very challenging. And then the timing of these threshold interval training blocks, where they might be 4, 8, 12 weeks long, where you're focused on improving your threshold pace, that's going to really depend on your season. So if you're training for a 10K race, you're going to be doing a lot of this threshold stuff around the time before the race, so the 4 to 8 weeks prior to the race. Whereas if you're doing a longer event like an ultra marathon or something like that, you might be doing it much further away because it's much less specific. So you might be doing it months in advance to raise your threshold up so that when you're working on your zone 2, you're running at a faster pace.